All right. Welcome back to Mind Keys. It's so good to see you all again. So, this video is probably going to be a long one. I'm going to give you a heads up right now. So, make sure you have time to really get present to it. This video, for me, I think is one of the most important pieces of work I've done yet. And it's something that you're not going to find anywhere else because this is something I came up with on my own. So, this is my own map, my own model of awakening, the structure of awakening in specific. You're not going to find this anywhere else. So, take it in for whatever it's worth. I'll give the caveat up front that this is a work in progress. I'm not presenting this as a finished, complete theory. This is just what I've got so far. It's open to revision. I reserve the right at any time to change my mind about any part of this map. But I wanted to give it to you as a working kind of beginning point to begin to understand your own experience of awakening, the process of awakening for those around you. And obviously, right now in the world, we are in a time of massive awakening. We are in a time of huge potential for awakening, too, of a rapid spread of awakening and a deepening of our experience of awakening. But in order for that to go well, in order for that to go successfully, we've got to be able to recognize where we are in this structure, inside this kind of map of awakening, and make sure that we continue to move forward on our progression and don't get stuck along the way. A little bit of history here, and then we'll go ahead and get into it. I made this map about a year ago, and it kind of spontaneously popped in my head one day when I'd kind of been low key in the background thinking about how do I communicate what awakening is to somebody else. If I wanted to communicate what the process of awakening that I've experienced and that I've seen in other people's lives, that I've read in books about wise people, saints, sages, politically active people like Jung or Freud, psychological awakening, all of those types of people, saints like Paramahansa, all of those kinds of people share a common kind of structure to their personal growth. There are underlying themes in what happened as they awakened that are universal. And that's really what I wanted to get at. I wanted to get at what is not the content of awakening. So not what are the insights or what are the particular conflicts or struggles or whatever you might be dealing with. More, I wanted to look at the structure and what is the overall consistent pattern we see when it comes to people's awakening processes. Where do they get stuck? What are the common kind of problems they deal with that get them stuck? How do we recognize where we are in that process and then actualize that so that we can move forward? I think it goes without saying that we're in an unprecedented time, maybe not totally unprecedented, but certainly it's been a long time since we've been in a period of so much change and transformation wake up in our culture. And as people are waking up and transforming, the possibility for awakening is here. If it's ever been here in our culture, it is here now. And that's a beautiful thing. That is a gift. But there are some things we need to understand about awakening and what it is and how it works if we want to really take a hold of that and get the most out of it. And so I want to make this for you and just kind of take a shot at it, take a crack at it, and see if I could kind of convey to you, as imperfect as I am as a communicator and a public speaker, as imperfect as I am as a thinker, I want to give you what I can with this right now because I feel like this map needs to get out there to the world, to your eyeballs, to anybody else's eyeballs who you think might benefit from this. So I'm doing the best I can here. I hope you enjoy this content. Buckle up, strap in. It's going to be a long video. We're going to be looking at all kinds of different facets of this process of awakening. And I hope by the end of it, you really get a good. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. So quick note here. This is, like I said, something that I came up with spontaneously about a year ago while I was working on a podcast. And I was trying to figure out ways to communicate to a mass audience what I understand and what I've observed from my own personal awakenings And what I've observed from biographies I've read of whether it's spiritual teachers and saints like Paramahansa Yogananda, whether it's people who had a political awakening, people who had a psychological awakening, this applies for any type of awakening process you might go through. And I want to make the clear distinction here that what I'm conveying to you isn't, again, the content. So it's not the insides of awakening. It's not the particular realizations you're going to have, because those depend on what it is you're awakening to and from. Rather, I want to give you the structure, the overall shape of the awakening process, so that you know more broadly what it is you're moving through. What is this track we're on when we're awakening as human beings, right? So that's what I'm here to convey to you with this model. So I want to just kind of set that up front. So let's go ahead and get into it here. So what is awakening? So awakening is fundamentally about your relationship to truth, right? It's about, like I said in other videos, it's about taking in new information, about more information about life that challenges what you think you know or what you've already experienced and grounds you in a more accurate version of the truth. That's fundamentally what awakening is. It's about adding on to your understanding of truth. Now, as far as we know, again, human beings are highly subjective. We cannot get outside of our subjective perception of reality. If you study quantum physics at all and you start listening to any of the kind of the modern thinkers of quantum physics, there's no way to unentangle the perceiver from the perceived, right? So we don't know if it's even possible to truly experience an objective universe. So all we know is our subjective experience, and our subjective experience can be limited or can be expanded and grow and grow and grow. And I'm going to offer you that that's what awakening is. It is an infinite growth path of adding to your relationship of truth. It follows a pattern. There's a pattern here that's kind of universal inside of awakening, of transcending to the next level of your awakening, to the next level of your life experience, while including whatever it is that you had previously learned. So there's this transcendence plus inclusion kind of thing that happens as we awaken. And it continues to expand your perception of reality into more and more information. So again, we are constantly, if you want to use the metaphor of an eyeball, we are like an eyeball that is slowly, constantly dilating its pupil to take in more light and therefore more detail about life around us, but also within ourselves, right? So that's kind of what awakening is at a fundamental level. It is fundamentally about truth. It is fundamentally infinite. It is fundamentally about transcending and including more and more information into your experience of life, your experience of yourself, your experience of the world around you. There are some preconditions that need to be there for awakening. So I want to tell you what those are, because without these preconditions, really nobody is going to move forward. There's no reason to move forward. There's no drive. There's no impetus for awakening. There's no impetus for change. So I'm going to offer you that the precondition for awakening, and this is the pattern here, is pain. So this is the basic map. This is the basic model. And as simple as it is, there's actually a lot of detail underneath kind of what's going on here. But basically, we start off in pain, then we move into a pattern interrupt kind of experience, which is the beginning of awakening. Then that pattern interruption moves into taking in a new map of reality. That new map then becomes something that we commit to and start to develop around. And then eventually, as we're leaning into our path, we come up against some hard truths about whatever it is that we've experienced with awakening. And then those hard truths then lead us either back into pain, which can create a new pattern interrupt, or into transcendence, where we... Okay, so like I was saying, in order for awakening to happen, first we have to have this precondition of pain. And obviously, this is very relevant with what's going on in the world right now. There's a lot of pain, especially here in the US, in terms of, race equality, racism, police brutality, historical injustices being reconciled. There's so, and then, all the conflict online, all the arguments, all the differing views, all the judgments, all the kind of infighting amongst different kind of people who used to be friends but hold different perspectives. There's so much pain going on right now. And with that pain, we have this fertile moment of potential for awakening. But if we don't take charge of it in the right way, it could also just turn into trauma and just recapitulate the same problems over and over and over. So let's talk a bit more about pain as a precondition for awakening. So with pain, in terms of awakening, it's important to understand that just because you're in pain doesn't mean you're going to awaken. Most people relate to pain by tuning it out, right? By ignoring it, by suppressing it, by trying to stuff it down and not process their feelings, and then numb it out with, entertainment, with alcohol, with food, with socializing, with sex, with the internet, with porn, with whatever. You pick your poison. People tend to ignore the pain, keep it inside themselves, and then stay busy, stay distracted. This is probably part of why, if you have an overactive mind, this is probably part of why, because there's pain underneath that you're trying to avoid by overthinking. Okay, I know this is true for me. So I'm sure it's true for some of you out there too. So here's what we want to know about pain. Okay, so the point is that pain can steer you away from awakening, and you can just live your life trying to avoid and suppress pain. But sometimes pain becomes a precondition that makes you uncomfortable enough that you want to change, right? That you want to grow. And so this pain could be subtle or extreme. So it could be an abusive situation, it could be a toxic relationship or an abusive household, it could be something terrible, or it could be something as simple as feeling bored, feeling malcontent, feeling disconnected, feeling isolated, feeling confused, feeling uncertain about yourself or about the world or about which way to go. That would all be, in my definition, some form of pain, because none of that is fun to experience, right? Fundamentally, at a nervous system level, we don't like those experiences. So it's painful. Pain can be unconscious or ignorant. So you may not even know that you're in pain. You can not want to know about what's out there, what's better. So this is very common. I see this a lot with people where they get confronted with maybe spirituality or an intellectual idea that is beyond their map of reality, or they get confronted in some way with some new piece of information and they just don't want to know. They just shut it down. They just want to be dumb. They just want to, whatever, numb themselves out in whatever way they do and just tune out from any new information, because it causes them to become aware not only of the new thing, but of all the pain they've also been filtering out. Pain also takes the form of us just coping, like I said, by numbing and kind of suppressing the pain and trying to avoid, or venting, right? This is a very common one right now that we see a lot of. What is venting? Venting is trying to use our verbal social brain to offload the trauma, the anxiety, the stress, the negative emotional states that are trapped in the nervous system. So by venting, what we're doing is we're using words and facial expressions and social relating to regulate ourselves socially. I'll talk more about that in another video about polyvagal theory. It's an important piece to understand. But just know that venting obviously is always a sign of pain, in case you couldn't tell. There is the trauma possibility paradox involved in pain. So when we're deep in pain, we are stuck essentially in some form of trauma, right? Some form of suffering, some form of something not working and not adding up in life and struggling with it, not having a good solution to it. And the problem with that, the paradox there, is that when we are stuck in pain, we can't conceive of other possibilities for our life that seem realistic, that seem like something we could attain. And yet the paradox of that is that by being able to conceive of new possibilities, that then engenders in us, or empowers us rather, to achieve those things. So when you're able to conceive of a new possibility, then you can grow in that new direction and create some sort of better life for yourself, some new experience. You can't create something you can't conceive of. You can't achieve something you can't imagine and then engage in, right? But if you're so stuck in pain and trauma, that will block you from even being able to imagine or conceive of a new possibility for yourself. So it's kind of this weird loop where stuck in trauma, can't really conceive of the thing that would fix the problem that would keep you from being stuck in trauma. So that keeps you re-looped into trauma. So this is one of the things that I work with people, is helping them unload the trauma enough that all of a sudden the vision of what becomes possible becomes accessible on the inside. And then with that, the ability to start to take action towards a better life. So another thing that happens in pain is that we have no hope for change. Basically what I just said, when you're stuck in that trauma possibility paradox, then you don't really have hope for growth or for change. You're just hopeless. So you see this a lot with people who are stuck in pain. They're accept your lot in life. This is the way it is. This is who you are. This is as good as it's going to get for you. The pain you're dealing with, just endure it, carry it, struggle with it the rest of your life. There's no way out. Now, people who try to convince you of this are so burdened by their own pain that they can't, again, conceive of anything beyond it. And they want to enroll you in it too, because misery does love company, right? Other examples of pain: being stressed, just too much, overwhelm, being bored, being stuck. And, another thing that I want to say about this is pain is part of default cultural conditioning. If you look around you at default social ways of viewing the world here in 2020, what you're going to notice is that pain is normal. Pain's socially acceptable. Pain is, if you're angsty, upset, frustrated, dissatisfied, bored, annoyed, wanting more, disconnected, emo, whatever. If you're any of those things, that is so normalized now. That is so okay. That is so acceptable. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with making it acceptable, but it becomes amplified. It becomes something that is made to be a social norm in such a way that people feel reinforced and validated in it, and therefore never consider that they could move past pain. And it's actually this funny thing that I notice often, that when I talk to people about being in pain and I challenge them around the idea of growing past their pain and improving their life, usually you get some form of the, not wanting to know, no hope for change. This is how it is. And it's okay. This is normal, because look around. Everyone else is angsty and angry and in pain and sad and dissatisfied too. So I'm human. This is normal. This is okay. I would offer you, and I imagine if you're watching this channel, if you're listening to me talk, you already know there's more to life. There's better ways of being. There is deeper happiness. There's greater fulfillment. I'm sure you've felt it. I'm sure you've glimpsed it. I'm sure you've tasted it. So you know it's possible. So I would encourage you, and I would encourage all of us, to get outside the default cultural conditioning around pain and start to awakening. So with awakening, we have this whole experience of pain as a precondition. This is the fertilizer that kind of grows the seed of awakening. But what starts the process of awakening is moving from this pain into a pattern interrupt. So what is a pattern interrupt? So this is something that it's kind of hypnosis jargon, but it's also kind of self-explanatory, where we are in a loop of living life, doing our regular thing, and maybe it's uncomfortable, and maybe it's disappointing, maybe it's dissatisfying, but it's my life and it's my groove, right? Then something happens. It could be an experience you have. It could be a concert you went to. It could be a person you met, a conversation you had. It could be that you ate a bunch of mushrooms. It could be that you went on a trip to another country. It could be that you went away to college and learned something new. It could be a YouTube video you saw. It could be anything that interrupts your sense of reality and all of a sudden loosens and liberates all this kind of life force that's been stuck in this redundant pattern you've been in, right? So you have to have that pain there in order to want to get out. And then what happens is something comes into your life, something comes into your reality and shakes it up, interrupts it. And when it interrupts it, what happens is you get a new awareness of life, of what might be better for you or more true, what might be a higher version of reality than the kind of consensus reality that you've been stuck in, whatever your cultural consensus is, that gets kind of challenged and interrupted. Now, I want you to know that when you experience a pattern interrupt, I've done videos about this already. You might have seen them, so this might be redundant for you, but if you haven't, I want you to know, and this is important for what's going on right now in the world. So we have all this pain, and then we have a pattern interrupt with these riots and with this looting and with these peaceful protests and everything that's going on, right? And also we had a pattern interrupt just before that with COVID-19, right? So these are two pattern interrupts back to back in our culture. Now, here's what's interesting about a pattern interrupt. When you disrupt the pattern, you liberate and you stir up all this life force energy. Your nervous system snaps on and becomes awakened for a moment and pays attention, because in nature, when you experience a pattern interrupt, it's a signal to pay attention so that you don't die, right? So maybe you're walking through the forest and all the birds stop chirping and everything goes dead silent. That's a bad sign. That means maybe there's a bear, maybe there's a cougar, maybe there's something that's going to eat you, right? So your nervous system knows this and knows to pay attention to these kinds of cues. So when life happens to interrupt everything that's going on, you get a liberation of your life force energy to protect you. Now, what can happen with this life force energy, this kundalini, this kind of spiritual energy, is that you can then use that to liberate yourself, which would be the awakening process, or that can become traumatic. So if your nervous system all of a sudden is wide open and taking in information, and all you take in is more pain or more upset or more disappointment or more, negative information or more, defeat, what you're going to experience is trauma. So this moment of pattern interrupt is a vulnerable, powerful moment where you can liberate yourself, or you can be traumatized further, which obviously adds more pain and just stuffs you back down into coping, right? So what else can happen is, in that moment of liberation, if you take the moment of liberation, you run with it, is you develop a new set of values and new habits. So I want you to think about it like you're going along in life. All of a sudden, your pattern gets interrupted, right? And that's liberating, and your life force is liberated, and you're awakened, and you snap awake for a moment. And then you realize that there's something better available to you. You realize that there's something more out there. There's something more maybe inside of you. There's something in life that's a higher level, or that's different, or that's closer to the truth for you. And whatever that might be, it creates a new set of value systems. So what's a value system? A value system is a set of things that you identify as being of crucial importance, the key important things. Those are your values, right? So in that moment of pattern interrupt, you start to identify new things that are more important in life. Now, out of that awareness of these new things that are more important, that are clearly another set of values that are better than the values you've been living, you develop a sense of a possibility for a different life. All of a sudden it occurs to you that, oh, right, there's another way of living. There's another way of doing me. There's another level to what it means to be me. There's another level of what it means to be a human being. There's another level of what it means to be in community. Whatever the message about awakening is, there's another political system I could live inside of. There is, et cetera, et cetera. You start to get a sense, oh, there's a different way of life possible. And that creates, obviously, a buy-in, an induction into this new way of life or this new culture, right? So this is kind of a moment, this pattern interrupt, a fertile chaos where your nervous system, your neurology is freed up. Your life force is freed up. Now, in this broader pattern of awakening, this whole path of awakening, one thing that happens is a problem that happens at this stage of the pattern interrupt is that people get addicted to pattern interruption itself because it's exciting. Or they get addicted to skepticism of refinement, right? So what can happen here, you can think of drugs, music, events, um, even debates, um, information, even can all be a form of a pattern interrupt, right? So not only can they be ways that you cope and you suppress pain, they can also be forms of interrupting your own pattern. And as you interrupt your own pattern, that there's a dopamine response to that. There's an excitement, there's an alertness in that, right? And in that alertness, what can happen is that you get addicted to doing that. So an obvious one would be alcohol. Another obvious one would be going to music events and doing drugs. Another obvious one would be doing things that terrify you, right? So maybe you get addicted, you become a thrill seeker, and you start doing crazy shit because it feels good to be alive for a moment, right? Um, and another problem you see is that instead of like that becoming a liberating thing that awakens you to a new possibility of life, what ends up happening is people become skeptical that there's anything beyond just interrupting your pattern or being stuck in the pattern. So people get in this kind of loop of, what Tony Robbins would call a crazy eight, where it's like, oh, I'm bored, I'm in pain, I'm depressed, and then, oh, fuck this shit, I can't deal with it. Okay, I'm gonna break free, I'm gonna break out of it, I'm gonna do some crazy shit, I'm gonna get wild here. Okay, that's too much, it's overstimulating, I'm gonna cool it back down. Okay, I'm bored, I'm depressed, right? So you kind of loop back and forth in this double loop of either I can be excited or I can be like bored and depressed, and you kind of waffle back and forth. So that's a place where a lot of people get stuck, is just stimulating themselves to kind of get out of the default. Then when things are too overstimulating, going back to the default, right? But what happens next is that really you start to take in a map. So I'll explain what I mean by map here in a moment, but I want you to just think about this and recognize that this can all happen very quickly. So you could be in pain, something happens, it interrupts you, it creates a sense of possibility in you. This possibility then creates a new awareness, and then you're immediately open and suggestible to a new way of life. And that could be communicated to you all kind of in a very quick one fell swoop of a moment, a few hours, a day, a week. Very quickly, you can start to take in a new map of reality. So let's talk about that. So what do I mean by a map? By map, I mean what we would say in NLP is the map is not the territory, right? This is a very common personal development saying. I'm sure you've heard. It comes from Alfred Korzybski. What it means is basically none of us have a complete, clear, accurate understanding of reality that doesn't have an overlay of linguistic, conceptual, words to describe every experience we have. There's no way that you could be looking at me and looking at the back of the room around me, hearing my voice, taking in these ideas without having learned the words that define all of what that means to you. So, hat, face, appearance, room, et cetera, white, shirt, that is, microphone, camera, presentation, all the words in the presentation. You had to learn all of these concepts, and they constitute your map of reality, right? And your map has a set of meanings embedded in it that are, yours, but may have come from the culture you grew up in, or the family you grew up in, or from the experiences you've had. Maybe they are meanings you've been carrying since you were a very young kid. This is all very common, right? So we have these maps of reality that we use to interpret reality. And we use to filter what is good, what is bad, what is safe, what is right, what is wrong, all that, right? And when you have a pattern interrupt, all of a sudden you tend to, if you progress past the pattern interruption, take in a new map. Sometimes, for example, this is a very common one, people smoke DMT and they have this crazy out of body, sacred geometry, machine elf experience, right? And it's so real and so beyond anything they've ever experienced before that they don't have a language to really describe very well what the heck they experienced, right? So then what do? They start reading. They start reading, they start listening to Terence McKenna talks, they start, listening to other, teachers, Timothy Leary or Maps or whatever it is. They start to take in more information and learn what the hell was that? What does DMT do? Where does it come from? How is it made? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So you start to want to build a map of understanding around the raw experience you had. Now, a map gives us structure and meaning. And a whole paradigm can be naively taken in, and we often confuse the map for reality. So we often confuse the concepts that we take in for the physical experience itself. And it's so important to separate these out and identify that concepts and language about experience is not the same thing as experience. This is what is meant by the map is not the territory. Excuse me, I'm going to drink some water. Whoa. All right. Voice. My voice is back. Nice. Okay, so the map is not the territory, right? The map is the map. And the map gets grown or mutated or expanded or replaced altogether when we have that pattern interruption experience. And it's very easy for us to naively take in a pre-made map created by somebody else. Oh yeah, this is what that is. This is what that means. In the case of smoking DMT, maybe you start listening to Terence McKenna and you just buy into everything he says because it more or less fits what you experienced, and he got there first with the words to describe the experience. But that doesn't mean he's right. Doesn't mean he's accurate. Doesn't mean it's the whole truth. Doesn't mean it has the nuance that describes what you experienced, or that that's all of it, that that's the whole view, just because you have one view and one set of words that describes what you've experienced. I see this happening a lot right now in society with these dialogues around race, racism, because they are grounded in social justice and political correctness, which are grounded in, a few different theories. Cultural Marxism, it's grounded in basically Marxist theory. It's grounded in critical theory, which is also grounded in Marxism. It's grounded, so there's a whole set of ideas that have been stair-stepped in order to build up this concept called political correctness or social justice. And so if you're someone who cares about what's going on, I don't want to harp on this too long, but if you're someone who cares about what's going on, you care about the plight of Black Americans, you care about people of color, you care about racism and discrimination in this country, you might have taken in this whole map that was pre-made by these people with all these belief systems built into it in the background, and this kind of particular type of logic and way of thinking about things that is just embedded in the map. And you take in the whole map, right? If you maybe you want to learn about that, and they define a language that people think through, that now people are attacking other people through, right? So again, the map is not necessarily the territory. We need to be able to separate out what is map from raw experience and challenge maps. This is one of the things that's just crucial to awakening, crucial to blossoming as a human being, is to constantly be challenging and refining your own map of reality. Sometimes you take in a map, you check it against what you've experienced, you read counter arguments, you learn about it, and you find that's true. You find that it's accurate. You find that it continues to work for you. Sometimes you check it and challenge it, and you find that it isn't true, or it doesn't hold up to scrutiny over time. That's up to you. I'm not saying all maps are bad. I'm not saying, that political correctness is right or wrong. What I am saying is that it's a particular form of map with a particular set of embedded beliefs. Same is true for every religious kind of perspective. Same is true for Western culture and Western civilization. Same is true for conservatism, liberalism, etc., etc., etc. They're all maps with limits and with distortions and with partial truths and with concepts that need to be questioned and challenged. Okay, more water. Okay, so what are the problems with taking in a map? I kind of just laid that out. But some examples are dogmatism, getting really rigid and zealous about the map being true, and confusing the map for reality, right? That's a huge one. It's very, very common. You want to be mentally flexible. You don't want to be dogmatic. But when you're newly awakened and you've just found this new map and you have all this passion because it creates this new sense of possibility in your life, you're more likely to be blind to how you're being dogmatic or rigid or defensive or a zealot about your map of reality. Another very common one is confirmation bias. You have a new experience, you have a map that kind of matches that experience, and that becomes a self-reinforcing belief that what you experience and what you believe about that experience is true and correct. And so you start thinking, well, this is how it is, and then everything you come up with to reinforce that is just confirmation bias, right? Another example is negativity bias. This is huge. So in most maps of reality, there's some form of skepticism about other aspects of reality, right? So we use negativity to reinforce what it is we think we believe, and we poo-poo anything that might be outside the map that we are currently carrying. And we tend to, and it's kind of a harsh thing to say, but this has been true, I found in my own spiritual growth process, also my own psychological growth process, and I've seen it over and over with people who move through different political movements. We tend to trade one form of delusion for another. This is one of the problems with taking in a map. We confuse the map for reality, and we had maybe one delusion about reality, which is that reality is terrible, it's painful, it sucks, there's no way out. Then all of a sudden we have an interruption, we have an awakening, we get enthusiastic, and we've traded one delusion for another delusion. So you want to be guarding against that by constantly checking your map and making sure that it's accurate, and be willing to upgrade it, be willing to shift it, be willing to radically challenge your own map of reality. This is part of enlightenment. This is part of how spiritual masters awaken. They're radically, fundamentally, at the most deep levels of your experience of reality, challenging that sense of reality until they find a more fundamental truth. That's what awakening is. There's another huge problem with taking in a map, which is in-group, out-group dynamics. So you become a part of a group that has a certain map, that has a certain culture and a certain way of seeing and a certain way of believing, a certain way of thinking and emoting and feeling and living. And anybody who doesn't share that map is inherently wrong, weird, strange, crazy, etc., etc. So there's an in-group, there's the we who get it and they who do not get it, right? So that's all happens like that when you take in a map. So you want to guard against these problems because these will keep you stuck at this stage, right? So if you are being dogmatic, if you are mentally rigid, if you are zealous, if you are just stuck defending your map all the time, if you are just kind of in-group, out-grouping where you're like, we get it, they don't, all of that is a sign that you're stuck at this phase of the map. You haven't really moved past kind of really just defending and trying to absorb your map of reality. But as awakening progresses, what happens is that generally you move past just taking in the map. And this is kind of a bigger, longer period that kind of follows where you develop what we call resources. So by a resource, what do I mean? I mean anything that is a skill set, a point of view, a way of thinking, like a method of thinking, a whole study, a whole, physical skill, anything that's kind of a set of capabilities that comes out of the map. So this is really where you move from, taking in the vision that's kind of lifted you up out of your suffering, and you begin to put it into practice to further the possibility of the vision that the map brought you, right? So this is a shift really from outcome of like, oh, I want life for me to be like this, or I want the world to be like this, to process, where you shift from idealism to, okay, let's get dirty. Let's build these habits. Let's make this happen. Let's get it. Let's do, so it's from concept to action. And it's very common. This can be a very long phase. And this can be a phase that goes on and on and on, because truth be told, you're never done refining your skill set. You're never done growing as a human being, or refining or adapting, or, nuancing out or adding on to whatever skill it is, whether that is thinking, speaking, debating, any physical action. If I want to become good at playing guitar, there's no end to what I can learn on playing guitar. I can learn new styles. I can learn new techniques. I can learn new ideas. It goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, right? So the process of the resource, of the skill set, is endless. And so people often get stuck here. And there are a few ways that most commonly people get stuck. So let's say you take in the map, you have the new possibility. You're like, okay, boom, let's do this. You get excited, but then maybe you're not really trained well at doing, and you have a habit of procrastinating. And so you kind of avoid doing enough to advance. So you practice just enough to get kind of good at whatever it is, kind of fluent in that skill, but not enough to master it, not enough to transcend it, not enough to become like a leader at it, just good enough to be good, right? Just good enough that, oh yeah, I can do that thing, but not so good that you are next level with that thing, right? And so people get stuck there, just kind of doing it for a while. Then, I'll procrastinate, I'll tune out, I'll do more of it, just to reinforce that sense of my identity, and then I'll blah, 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 right? People get stuck there a lot. You see this a lot in the spiritual community, where people will meditate just enough to cope, just enough to get by, just enough to feel okay. People will do their mantras, yoga, whatever, just enough to say that they're spiritual and that they're doing, but not enough to progress, not enough to actualize, not enough to become highly refined at that skill. Another big thing is people get caught up on the other side on being perfect and giving all their power to the practice instead of self-trusting. So people, become avoidant basically, and avoid doing enough practice to progress. But the other side is people get perfectionistic, and they become dogmatic, not so much about the map as the practice. They want to be perfect at it before they put themselves out there in the world or share whatever it is they're cultivating. And this becomes its own form of bypassing, where I don't know enough, I'm not good enough. My teachers say I'm not ready. I, keep having my own disagreements with what it is that I'm learning and practicing. And so obviously I have more work and more force to put upon myself to cram myself into the practice until I'm molded and shaped by it, right? So there can be a dishonoring of what's authentic in this experience of, over perfecting, developing your skill set, right? So this is very common. A lot of people get stuck here too, wanting to be perfectionistic as a way of avoiding dealing with what's coming up on the path. Because they have a sense, if you're learning by doing, you have a sense of maybe where there were some flaws in the map. And you have a sense of maybe where some of the things you've heard about this area of life might not be totally true, or you might have a disagreement or a question or a doubt or a concern, right? But you filter that out because, oh, it's probably just me. Oh, I'm probably just not good enough at this yet. So I'm going to keep doing and doing and doing. And so there's this kind of internal conflict of understanding that'll come up if you're engaged in something. You'll have questions, you'll have doubts, you'll have fears, but it's just like loop back into the practice over and over and over and over as a way of bypassing dealing with the discomfort and the kind of stress and the anxiety that comes from feeling out of alignment with your own map of reality. But that kind of leads us to the next step, which is reconciling hard truths. So, like I was just saying, when you practice something long enough, you start to realize that there's some hard truths that you bump up against that counter your map. And for a lot of people, this is, what's called cognitive dissonance. I'm seeing things that are true, that I don't like, that are uncomfortable, and I don't know how to fit into what I'm up to here with this. And so I'm just going to ignore it. But over time, these truths, if you're being self-honest and you're paying attention, these are the things to reconcile to further you on the path. You can't get around them. You've got to get real with them. You've got to come head to head with these truths and look, because the obstacle is the path, right? The whatever it is you're grappling with is where the learning is. You can just retread your same skill set over and over and over, and eventually you stop growing and you stop awakening. So what happens is you have an awareness of contradictions and limitations in the map. You have awareness of your own shortcomings. So maybe in the map you have these ideals. I'm going to become an enlightened bodhisattva. I'm going to become the next Sigmund Freud. I'm going to become politically perfect and save the world from the suffering that people are going through, right? You have some sort of high enlightened ideal in your map, and then you start to become aware, oh shit, I'm highly flawed. I'm a human being. I've got a dark side. I've got a lot of bullshit I'm carrying in the back of my head. I've got a lot of lies. I've got a lot of self-deception I'm carrying. And that stuff starts to come to the surface, right? You start to see your own shortcomings. You start to see, oh, this path that I thought what it was, maybe it's not all it was marketed to be to me, or maybe it's not all I thought it could be for me, or maybe it's not going to bring me where I really wanted to go, right? That's a bitter thing to start to reconcile. And what starts to happen with reconciling these hard truths is that you either want to figure it all out. So, okay, let me learn more. Let me go deeper. Let me learn more additional tools and skills that will help me to reconcile this and understand what this is. Or there becomes this obsession with kind of, when I clean it all up and I'm perfect, then I will blah, 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 blah. Right? So there is this notion of, let me just figure it all out. Let me just clean it all up. What you see is people tend to go into shadow work, right? They tend to go into all of a sudden realizing that maybe their issues or their trips or their concepts aren't even theirs. It's ancestral trauma. It's stuff that their grandparents were carrying or their parents were carrying that is now echoing through our bodies, right? Or maybe it's childhood wounding. All of a sudden we become aware that, oh, I am carrying, PTSD or trauma from something that happened in childhood, from my first days at school, or something my parents said that they didn't mean to say that landed the wrong way when I was whatever age, or whatever. I got teased as a kid out on the playground, whatever it is, right? We have childhood wounding, we become aware of it. We get doubts. We start to just doubt. We lose the faith in our map, lose the faith in, the vision, the possibility of whatever it is that our map, says should be, so we start to notice what is in contrast to what should be. And what should be starts to lose its glow. It starts to lose its meaning a little bit. And we become more self-aware around our own tendencies and our own habits and how those might be out of alignment with where it is we want to go. So we've got to reconcile that. I'm lazier than I would like to be in order to do the thing I want to achieve. I'm, prone to anger, and that gets in the way of me achieving what I want to achieve, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We start to see our own habits and how these get in the way, right? This is often where people reach for personal development tools, for self-help, for self-healing. We start to, if we're really being honest, look at the brutal aspects of being a human being and just have to accept that we are still animals and we still have an animal nature to us, a primal nature, an aspect of what we do. Even though we're in modern civilization, we have all these beautiful hopes for the future. We have all this, beauty in front of us that we would like to actualize and all these good things we'd like to do with the world. But some of that flies in the face of the hard reality of how we operate as human beings. And so just becoming more aware of that reality becomes something that happens. So you start to become aware, okay, I'm an animal, I'm primal, I do unconscious shit. I don't know why I just said what I said. I don't know why that person just said what they said. You start to become aware that people are driven more by these kind of animal biological imperatives much more than they are by, logic, rationality, idealism, or by any sort of sense of beautiful kind of higher level values. And you have to start to reconcile that animal nature with what's possible. When you see a Paramahansa, when you see a Gandhi, when you see, an enlightened figure or someone who does something amazing and transcendent, how do you reconcile that with being an animal, with being dumb, with being impulsive, with being selfish, with being angry, with being greedy, with being fearful? How do these things reconcile? That's the kind of stuff you start to think about. And in that reconciliation, you start to integrate your higher and your lower self. You start to realize, okay, I can't ditch the animal. The animal is integrated into everything I do and has been driving me every step of the way. And when I look around me, I also notice that everybody else is also driven by their animal nature, maybe more than me even. And I've got to acknowledge that that's part of what I'm working with in the world here. And that's part of why things go sideways. That's part of why we have strife and struggle. So how can I integrate what I've learned and maybe the experiences I've had that are of this higher nature, whether that's, spiritual ideals, whether that's intellectual ideals, whether that's, mystical experience you've had, or touching the heart of divine love or something beautiful like that. And how do I merge that and bring the animal into contact with that so that I'm whole and bringing all of myself into the world, right? And in that, you have to forgive. So I just made a video for you guys about forgiveness, talked about one of the ways that you forgive. It's a key part of the awakening process. You have to forgive yourself. You have to forgive your own biology and your own animal nature. You have to be able to forgive others for the same thing. And recognize that this is part of being a biological entity on the planet. There's no way around it. We are biological entities, and the rules of being a biological entity don't always fit with our high-minded ideals of how society should operate. So what does that mean? It means you need to be able to forgive. And we start to falsely assume that when we get to the bottom of it, we're going to reach catharsis. And this is something I've seen in myself. I got stuck in this part for years. And I've seen this in a lot of friends of mine who are, especially who are healers, who are, therapists or anything like that. You see this pattern where the notion is, if I just get to the bottom of my issues, I'll be set free. And then I'll be able to move forward. But the thing is, issues, there is no bottom to the issues. There you can keep digging and digging and digging and finding more and more shadow and more pain and more fear, because you're a biological entity and you're carrying the genetic memory of all your ancestors and all their pain and all their fears. And what is so often misunderstood about issues, and I'll do more videos about this too, is that issues are a loop. They are a circle. They're a cycle. They are not a linear thing. So there's no bottom to a circle, right? Circle just goes in a circle. So you can interrupt and explore your issues at different parts of the circle. There are ways out of the loop, but fundamentally you want to just have the skill intact of understanding that issues are part of being human, and you don't need to absolve yourself of all your issues in order to move forward in life. So a lot of people hold themselves back and get stuck here trying to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig, assuming they're going to hit some catharsis. And when they think of catharsis, this is another video I'm going to make, they think of it as some like big orgasm of peace and relief that's going to permanently fix them. That's not what catharsis is, if you understand the root of the word. And that's not what happens. What happens is you get skill with dealing with your own dark side, your own emotions, your own animal nature, your own lower nature. You start to integrate it You start to use it in context of the rest of yourself. You start to put it in its right place inside of you. And you start to honor it and listen to it and acknowledge it, but not let it rule you. So that's a different skill set entirely than trying to dig to some catharsis that you're never going to find at the bottom of the barrel. Okay, so drink of water. Okay, so how do we move past this phase? So what I see happen a lot is people hit these hard truths and it goes one of two ways. Okay, so the first thing is that causes pain and frustration and disappointment. That brings a person around into the loop in terms of being primed for another pattern interrupt. So maybe they renew their sense of whatever map sent them on this whole journey in the first place. Maybe they need some other parallel skill or some other new map or new worldview, and they're kind of ready for it because they're struggling with what they've got and it's not adding up, it's not working. And then boom, new pattern interrupt comes in, new solution, and they're back on the loop here. The other thing that can happen though is that we can move into transcendence. Transcendence is different from just retreading the loop. And I want to be clear, neither is wrong. This is just what happens. This is what I've seen happen over and over. So in transcendence, what we do is we actually let go of the outcome. So it's like, if you're doing spiritual work and you're pursuing, from an Eastern standpoint, Buddhist, Hindu standpoint, you're pursuing enlightenment, right? What teachers who teach about enlightenment will often tell you is that the desire for enlightenment keeps you away from being enlightened. And that seems to make no fucking sense. How could I achieve something without wanting it? How could I not think about the thing that is supposed to bring me all the peace and joy and bliss when that's everything I want, right? It seems like, especially for like monks and adepts who devote their whole lives to enlightenment, and then they're told your whole desire, your whole focus needs to go, right? How do you let go of the outcome? So you have to let go of what the map that you learned means. You have to let go of the practices, because sometimes the practices condition you in a way that isn't quite what it means to transcend. Sometimes, and you have to let go again of the struggles of the hard reconciliation process you've just been through. And it can feel very weird, but that's what it is to move to the next level. Is you have to let go of the outcome. You have to let go of what you thought this process was, move back into letting it emerge inside of you, allowing some deeper truth, some new, fresh, higher level of wisdom to emerge inside of you that isn't what you were experiencing before. You also find when you transcend that you're fluid with any part of the circle that you'd been experiencing so far. So you develop a fluid understanding of the map that you first took in. You develop a fluid skill set around these practices. You become very good at these practices. You become fluid at shadow work, at reconciling, questions, at owning your own truth, at bringing all that together in a kind of holding it in a soft way. So you hold, and you also become fluid even at dealing with pattern interrupts and allowing new information to come in a way that doesn't jar you so heavily. And that helps you to level up to this higher paradigm where basically what happens is you transcend. Again, I said this at the beginning, but this is really, really true. You transcend the journey you were just on and you include it. So it's not like, oh, that was a bullshit, I'm over that. No, you're not polarizing against whatever it is just because you found some discrepancies in your experience. Rather, you contextualize all of that as valuable and important and truthful in many ways and real in many ways, and you level up to a higher understanding that brings all of that with you, but also there's a new view with more information and a bigger truth, right? So you're kind of spiraling up. And you resolve the wounds and the struggles that you had been struggling with that started with the pain and the pattern interrupt, the wounds and struggles that maybe you had inside the map, that you had inside the process of gaining skills, and then that you really had to reconcile towards the end there. You start to resolve all of that by stepping outside of the struggle altogether. So you start to realize I was inside a particular struggle. I was inside a particular narrow tunnel of, pushing away from something in the past, trying to avoid what it was in the past and trying to move towards this thing I thought I wanted. But that whole experience of aversion and attachment, to use a Buddhist kind of way of describing it, is a struggle. And what you realize is that the transcendence is stepping outside of that struggle altogether and going, I don't have to be any of that. I don't have to be in any part of that pain of grasping and wanting or pushing away from. I can be outside of that altogether. And as you resolve these, you move into a deeper integrity and alignment with your higher values and the possibility that the map originally presented. So whatever the map, taught you or showed you as a possibility, it also, like I said, inculcates, it brings into you a new set of values, So let's say you have a mystical experience and it awakens in you a sense of divine love and a vision for the unity of humanity. This is a very common thing in spiritual circles, right? And you go through this practice and you develop these values of compassion, of love, of kindness, of goodness, of friendship, of open-heartedness, of turning the other cheek, these kind of very Buddhist or Christian kind of values of love towards your fellow man, right? Towards your fellow human. And as you develop these values, it's not really until you've transcended past that whole thing, till you've moved up a level, that you then start to really integrate fully and align that and be like, oh, I get now what it means to live that. Because what happens a lot, in the case of like maybe, spiritual values of compassion and love, is people get dogmatic. They get judgmental of anyone who is intolerant. They become intolerant of intolerance, right? They become angry that the world is not filled with love. They become upset and depressed that there's war and conflict. They can't wrap their heads around why people can't just get together and respect each other and care about each other. They don't understand why there's poverty. They don't understand why there's, internal struggle inside of different, communities, et cetera, et cetera. And so there becomes all this angst that is actually out of alignment with love and compassion. That is actually contrary to the experience of love and compassion. And, that's part of the process of this whole experience. But as you level up, you include love and compassion in a way that you come back into alignment with it, where you're able to all of a sudden be compassionate to everybody, even the intolerant people. You become loving towards all of life, even, the nations that are at war and the large corporations that are polluting and all the problem makers in the world. You start to bring your heart to that. And that integrity and that alignment will bring you into a higher view, a higher understanding that includes all of that. So you're really living in your heart. You're really living in love and compassion, but also you see the whys and the whats and more about it. And you're not in a polarized struggle with it. So you've integrated the higher values that original map of, loving everybody initially brought you. I hope that makes sense. So we either, again, from reconciling these hard truths, we either move back into pain and then pattern interrupt and come back around, or we integrate and we level up and we integrate and transcend into this next level, this next paradigm of worldview. And typically this higher paradigm of worldview will have more complexity to it, more nuance to it. It'll have a new set of values to it. So you might identify something new as important than where you started from. And in that, basically, you are growing and transcending, and you've integrated all this, and again, all this information, you've expanded your map of reality, you've refined your map of reality, you've acknowledged more of reality, and it just continues and continues and continues and continues. And basically, that's what awakening is. So I hope this makes sense. I know this is a long video. I know I've been talking fast. I got animated. I got excited. Hopefully this really registers for you and makes sense. But that's what it means to awaken. What it means to awaken is to be interrupted, to take in a map, to develop the skills around that map, to then have to struggle with the lack of truths that might be inside your map, and really reconcile all of that, and then to integrate all of that and transcend to the next level, and then to do it all over again. Because there's going to be pain at each level. There's going to be problems at each level. There's going to be needs at each level. And then you're going to go through another pattern interrupt. But what I've found is the more skillful you get at this, the more it becomes easier and easier to navigate, again, those pattern interrupts, those painful moments. You gain more and more tools, more and more insight, more and more connection to life, more and more self-actualization. And as you do, you aren't necessarily struggling as much. So as you rise up, as you level up again and again and again, it gets easier and easier and easier. But also the lessons get deeper and deeper and deeper. So that fundamentally is what awakening is. And I hope that serves you, and I hope that might be interesting to you. I know for me, this has been something that I've lived and that I keep living. And it's something that I'm really excited to share with you. So if you could do me a favor and just, comment, let me know if this is kind of resonating for you, if this hit the spot, if this makes sense, like and subscribe. Let me know how this hits home for you. And if you made some new connections here, it would mean a lot to me, because again, this is something I've never shared before. This is my own intellectual property. This is something I've developed on my own. You're not going to see anywhere else. So hopefully this has made a difference in your life and helps you to understand maybe where you've been stuck along the way, what's ahead for you, and give you some insight into where people are at in their growth process. So much love. Take care. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you guys soon.